All right, everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Reddit build. In part 1, we learned all of the fundamentals of Next.js, Chakra UI, and we learned how to use Recoil for global application state, and we learned about Recoil atoms, and we learned how to do all of this in TypeScript. If you are new here, part 1 will be available somewhere at the top of the screen. We left off last time just finishing up our login and sign up forms, and we are now ready to start working on implementing Firebase, getting it all set up. Just one note, I wanted to mention that I did create a Discord server after creating last video because I thought it would be useful for people to get help in. So if you are wanting direct access to me and you want to sort of ask on-demand questions on the project or really anything, feel free to join that server. I would love to see you in there. The link is in the description. Let's get back to work. All right, so what we're going to do is go to firebase.google.com, and this is where we're going to create our Firebase project and get some configuration variables to connect our app to Firebase. If this is your first time to the console, it may ask you to log in. So just log in with your Gmail account or create a new Gmail account. And then what we're going to do is go to the console. And I'm just going to click Add Project. And the name I'm going to give this project is just Reddit clone tutorial. Feel free to name yours whatever you'd like. And then you're going to be asked if you want to enable Google Analytics for this project. Because it is a demo, I'm just going to disable this. And then we're going to click Create Project. And this may take a few minutes. So once this is all done, let's click Continue. And it'll take us to our project. So we're creating a web app. So we're going to click on Web. And then we're going to give this a nickname. I'm just going to give it the same name as our project name. And then I'm going to click Register App. Perfect. Now, once that's done, it's going to ask you to install Firebase, but we already did that when we installed Chakra. If you did not install Firebase, now would be the time to do that. So go ahead and do that if you did not. We're going to basically do exactly this in our app, and that is how easy it is to connect Firebase to our app. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come over to our repo, and I'm just going to close some folders to clean this up a bit so it's a bit more visible. And inside of source, I'm going to create a new folder called Firebase. And then inside of Firebase, I'm going to create a file called client-app.typescript. And this is where we're going to put our initialized app. You will have your own unique configuration variables. Do not put the ones that are displayed in this video because it will not work. All right, so what I'm going to do is just quickly copy this over. All right, so now what we're going to do is just in the root of our project, I'm just going to create a new file called .env.local. And this is where we're going to put all of our environment variables for our Firebase project. So what I'm going to do is on the repo, I believe there should be a .env.example file that looks something like this. And this basically just contains all of the keys that we're going to put in our end file. If you don't want to manually type all this out because it's kind of annoying to do that, feel free to go to the repo on GitHub and grab these keys. I'm just going to paste these in here. And now we're going to copy these variables over to put them into here. All right, so once that is done, all we need to do now is just go back to our client app file and remove these hard-coded strings and just access our environment variables. So what I'm going to do is just temporarily move this down here for a second just so I can copy the things over. The first one's going to be process.env.thatthing, and we're going to do this for all of them. So once that's done and all these names match the variables inside of your env file, we can close this because we're not going to use it ever again for this build. All right, so now our app is set up to connect to our Firebase project that we created, and we're going to access it through this app instance that we created here. We're going to make a few changes down here though because we're using Next.js and we need to handle the case of server-side rendering, which introduces some complications with creating the app, but it is just a few lines of code and I'll explain them as we go. So I'm just going to remove these comments at the top. And what we're going to do is, in addition to this initialize app function, we're also going to grab a function called getApp as well as getApps. And we're also going to import a function from Firebase auth. And that function is going to be getAuth. We're also going to import a function from Firestore, and that is going to allow us to actually access our database when we create it soon. And that is going to be the function get Firestore. All right, and the last thing we're going to import is going to be from Firebase Storage, and that function is going to be get storage. And this is going to be used when we get into the creation of posts and users can upload images. We're going to store those images in Firebase Storage, and Firebase Storage is different than Firestore Database. Storage is used to store files and media, things like video and photos, whereas the database just stores JavaScript object JSON type data. All right, now down here, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize Firebase, and I'm just going to add a comment for clarity that's going to say for server-side rendering. Okay, so since our application is going to use server-side rendering in some areas, we need to avoid attempting to initialize an app on both the Next.js server as well as on the client side. Because the way Next.js works when you use server-side rendering is that it renders the app on the server, and then that is sent to the client, and then client-side rendering will occur. And we will get an error if we try to call this initialize app function both on the server and the client. And that will make a bit more sense once I write this function out. So basically how this is going to look is we're going to write it as a ternary operator, and this is going to call that function get apps, and this is going to get all the apps that we have created with our Firebase config object above. And it's going to say if this app does not exist, meaning that there is no length, then we're going to initialize it. However, if it does exist, we're going to go get that app. And whatever the result of this ternary operator is going to be stored in our app instance, and then we will have access to it on the client side when we need it. I hope that makes sense. So now we're going to actually create our Firestore instance, and this is basically how we're going to access our Firestore database. We're going to pass it our app, and then we're going to create our auth instance, which is how we're going to use Firebase Authentication. Also going to pass it our app. And we will, while we're here, create our storage instance, same thing, pass it our app. And now we just need to export all of these things so that we have access to them throughout our application. We can just simply import them in any other client-side file, and we can use their functionalities. So we are completely done with this file. We have created all of the necessary variables, and we are now ready to actually start using these things in our app to start creating users and data and images and whatever. So we can close this client app file and move forward. All right, so now that our app is actually able to communicate with our Firebase project, we can now implement authentication and actually start creating users. So for authentication, we are going to use this library called react-firebase-hooks, and these are hooks that are developed specifically for usage of Firebase inside of React. And they enable us to leverage all of the amazing powers of Firebase with just a few simple hooks and a few lines of code. And they're honestly unreal. So if you just search for this package on NPM and then you click on their GitHub repository link, this is where all of their documentation is. And if you come to the bottom here, you can see they have documentation for all of their available hooks. So we're going to focus right now on these authentication hooks. And if you come into here, you will see that they have hooks for essentially every single authentication method. So we're going to be using useSignInWithGoogle, useSignInWithEmail and password, and useCreateUser with password. But once you know how to use one of these, you can use them all, and you can implement these in just a few lines of code. So we are going to start off with useCreateUser with email and password, kind of a mouthful. And they have really good examples for each one of their hooks, and they look long, but they're honestly very, very straightforward. And maybe I'll zoom in a bit. Hopefully you can see that. So what I'm going to do is just come over here and grab the installation from NPM and come to our project and paste that in there. Perfect. Once that's done, I will just come back to this documentation here, and I'm just going to grab this and paste it in our code base because we're going to have it written the exact same way. So when we use any of the authentication hooks from that library, we need to pass it our Firebase auth instance, which is what we created in that client app file right here. And that is basically how we link our specific app to the hooks. So we're going to need to import both of these. So I'm going to try to auto import this. Okay, for some reason it's not wanting to auto import, which I don't understand, but sometimes that happens. Import from React Firebase hooks /auth. useCreateUser with email and password. And underneath that, I'm going to import our auth instance from, it's going to be all the way up in Firebase, client app, grab that auth object, and now it should be happy. So this hook returns to us 4 different variables. The first one is the actual function that's going to be used to create the user. So we're going to pass this our email and password. Then once this successfully completes, it returns to us a user. And then there is loading and error state, which helps track the progress of this function. So if this thing is in progress, this will be true. If it errors out, then this will happen. And we can use these 2 things to modify our UI to make it clear to the user what is going on. So this is where we're actually going to call that function. So I'm going to type out create user with email and password, and the arguments we're going to pass are going to be our signup form.email and our signup form.password. So let's quickly add form validation to check that a valid email has been entered and that the passwords that the user enters in the password and confirm password fields match. And actually, because we put the type of email on this input, HTML by default should handle the case of an invalid email, and it's going to check that the email actually contains the @, which is what we're going to consider a valid email. I think there's some libraries that exist that will check that it's like a valid domain and stuff, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I think that simply checking for the @ is completely fine. So the only thing we need to handle then is if those passwords match. So we're going to say if signupform.password does not equal to signupform.confirm password, let's set an error. And how are we going to set that error? Well, we're going to need to create another state variable. So we're going to create a state variable called form error. We can't use the keyword error because this is being taken by that there. Actually, what we're going to do is change the name of this to user error. It doesn't have to be specifically error because the hook is just going to return 4 parameters. It doesn't care what the name is. The 4th one, though, is going to be the error. So I'm just going to give it a name of user error. That way up here, I can use the more general term error. And I'm going to say set error up here. And this is going to be useState, and we're going to set it as an empty string to start off. And then we can come and actually remove this comment here and actually set error to be passwords do not match. And I'm just going to return out of the function because we do not want to proceed with this if their passwords do not match. All right, and let's open up our modal. And what I'm going to quickly do is just add that error text here if it exists. So I'm going to add some text in here that's going to say here is the error, just so we can see what it looks like. And I'm going to make the text align to be center and the color red, because red means error usually. And then I'm going to change the font size to just be a bit smaller, 10. Perfect. And we do not want to actually say here's the error. Let's actually put in here our form, not form error, we actually named it error. Perfect. And then to make this even a bit cleaner, I'm going to say error and that text. And basically that's just saying don't display this text unless this exists. So now let's try to submit our form. And you can see that those required things on our inputs are doing their job. They're making sure that text actually exists. And I believe that if I enter a thing that does not have the @ sign in it, it should give us that @ thing. Yeah. So it's saying it's not a valid email address. So this component handles that for us, which is super nice. But let's make sure if we do enter a valid email like shadi@shadi.com and I enter passwords that do not match, do we get that error? And yes, we do. Now you'll notice that when I submitted that, the page refreshed, and that is what happens by default on form submittal. In order to prevent that, we need to take the submit event and call the method prevent default. So what we're going to need to do is take in the event as an argument the same way kind of to what we did down here, how the function implicitly took in an event, and then we'll have access to all of the methods on that event. So I'm going to create that argument here, and the type of this is going to be react.formEvent. Because it is a form event, it's no longer a change event. And the type of HTML element that is producing this event is the HTML form element. And now, since we have that TypeScript type there, we get IntelliSense with all of the methods that exist for that specific event. And I can call event.preventDefault. And now if I try that again with a valid email, passwords that do not match, sign up, passwords do not match. Perfect. And what I'm going to do also is that when the form is submitted, I'm going to check if there is an error. And if there is, then I'm going to set it to an empty string because we kind of want to reset the error every time we try to submit the form. And you could add some other stuff as well to make sure that the password length is like 6 characters and doesn't contain these characters and contains blah, blah, blah. But again, that's kind of not necessary for this project. But feel free to add whatever you would like in terms of validation. All right, and one last thing that we're going to quickly do before trying to submit a user is I'm just going to use this loading state quickly on our button. And I can't remember if I explained this when we were creating the button, but a beautiful thing with Chakra UI is that with their buttons, and I think with all of their components, we can add an isLoading prop to the component, and we can pass it a Boolean, which will show a loading state if the Boolean is true. So for example, if I say true, it will show the loading state. So in this case, our Boolean is going to be that loading Boolean provided by that hook, because the status of this is going to be toggling from true and false, depending on what the hook is up to. So let's give this a go and see what happens. So I'm going to go over to our Firebase project and go to authentication, because that's where our users are going to show up if they are successful. And actually, I'll just click get started here because I didn't do that before. All right, so okay, so I'm glad I checked this before, because what we need to do is actually enable the specific authentication methods that we're going to be using. So in this case, email and password, and then later in just a few minutes, we're going to do Google. So let's click on email and password, and let's click enable. And then we will save that. And now Firebase is actually going to allow us to create users with email and password. So let's go ahead and give that a spin. And if it works, we should see that user show up inside of our users column here. So let's go back to our app. We will refresh to sort of reset everything. Let's open up our modal and let's enter shadi@shadi.com. I'm going to make the password Shadi. And let's see what happens. So we can see that loading state. You see how it toggled there. That was the hook changing status. We don't get anything on the UI because we haven't done anything. If it worked, I'm assuming it did. Let's go check our Firebase authentication. So I will need to refresh. And look at that. We do have a user in there with the email shadi@shadi. And that is how easy it is to create users with these hooks. And Google securely stores these users and encrypts our passwords, so we don't have to worry about any of that on our own. We can just focus on actually the fun parts of our app. So thank you to anyone who has contributed to these amazing libraries. All right, you guys, now I briefly want to show you how to do error handling with Firebase in the rare event that an error occurs. I know it's not the most exciting thing. Error handling is never that fun, but it is really good to know how to do it to make your app more robust. So let's quickly do that. So the first error that you might think of is what happens if we try to sign up a user that already exists. In the case of Shadi here, we already have a user that has been authenticated with shadi@shadi.com. What happens if we try to sign up again? Let's take a look. We get some sort of error here, and if we look more closely at it, we can figure out maybe what's going on. Okay, so let's bring that open. I'm going to zoom in. That might be a bit small for you. Wow, this is painful to get this thing to expand. Why won't this expand? I look like a tool right now trying to get this thing open. Okay, what I'm going to do, okay, this is all we really need to see. We can see that we got a 400 error, which means bad request. So Firebase just said that you tried to create a new user, but a user with that email already has been created. So we somehow need to just update our UI to indicate that to the user. So the way we're going to do that is actually through this user error variable given to us by the hook. So the way I'm going to illustrate what this error actually looks like is if I come down here to where we're actually rendering the error, which was right here, what I'm going to do is just add an or statement that says or user error. And an error in this case is the error we are setting with that state variable if there's like an invalid password. And user error is going to be the actual error returned from Firebase authentication. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, if error or user error, let's show some text that shows that error. I can also add an or statement here, and I'm going to type user error, and I'll notice that it has a property called message, and this is the thing we want to access on the error. Okay, so let's try to log in with shadi@shadi.com and see what happens. So we successfully show the error on the UI, Firebase error, auth, email already in use. But that's kind of like weird to show to the user. Maybe we want to show like more meaningful text. And I want to show you how to do that with Firebase. If you are totally fine with this, then like feel free to leave it. I just want to show you how to potentially display a more meaningful message. So inside of Firebase, I'm going to create a new file called errors.ts. And in here, we're going to put pretty much all the Firebase errors we're going to come across, which is not going to be that many. There's only like a few. But basically what we're going to do is create an object called Firebase errors, and that's going to contain these messages as keys. We're going to take this key and map it to a more useful error message. So for example, if the Firebase error is that auth email already in use thing, we can return a text that says a user with that email already exists. That's much more meaningful to the user. And now what we're going to do is inside of that signup form, I'm just going to go and import those Firebase errors. I'm going to copy this line down here because it's going to come from /Firebase errors. And we're going to grab that Firebase errors object. And then what we're going to do is where we were rendering this user error message, that is now going to be a key of the object Firebase errors. And this is how we can actually access that more meaningful error message, right? Because, and I'll address this red underline in a second, but if we just go back to errors, we can see that if we try to access the object at that error.message, it's going to give us this in return, which is a very useful message. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly attempt to address what is going on here. It's kind of a weird TypeScript thing, and we need to be more specific of what type it is that we're trying to use to index that particular object. Basically, all we're going to do is take the user.message and typecast it to a valid index of that object. And all typecasting is just taking a variable and changing its type to a new type. So the way to typecast in TypeScript is to take that variable and then write the word as, and then write the new type. This is kind of confusing because there's key of and type of here. And if this does not really make sense to you right now, do not worry. We're going to see this a few times throughout the project. So just kind of accept this for now. I really dislike telling people to just accept things when I'm teaching, but in this case, I just don't think this is something to get caught up on, and this will become a lot more clear when we start defining our own types and interfaces with like posts and communities and stuff. So now what we can do is we see that we're getting a more meaningful message there, which is great. Let's try to trigger the other one. Yeah, passwords do not match, but the styling changed a bit. I think there's just something going on with the logic here. Okay, yeah, so the formatting kind of messed up my logic here. And so I'm going to remove these brackets, and then I think to prevent that from reformatting improperly, I just need to add brackets around that. So this is a single Boolean here. Okay, and now we can see that we are getting the proper error there. Awesome, and if I just try one more time, we can see that we get the other error. So now errors are handling both of our cases, which is great. All right, and one thing I actually decided that I want to do to make this a bit more readable, because this is kind of confusing, I'm just going to get rid of this outer logic here, and I'm going to just simplify it to this. And this is just going to do the exact same thing as it was before. It just is a bit more readable. Okay, so that is enough about errors. I've had it with errors for now. Let's go do something more exciting. All right, so now that we have been able to successfully create users with email and password via that useCreateUser with email and password hook, let's go now implement OAuth and log our users in with Google using the similar hook, useSignInWithGoogle. And now that we've been able to use one of these hooks, we can use them all. They're all so similar in terms of functionality, and that is what I love about this library. So we're going to go to our OAuth buttons, which, if you recall, is this section here, and we are going to implement the pretty much same structure in this file. So at the top, we're going to import from react-firebase-hooks auth. This time, though, we're going to grab that useSignInWithGoogle function. And again, we're going to need to import our Firebase auth instance from that client app file, Firebase/client app, grab auth. And inside of this file, we're going to do pretty much the exact same thing as we did in the other file. We're going to call that hook and say useSignInWithGoogle, and we're going to pass it our auth object. And the 4 arguments this time are going to be sign in with Google, user, loading, and error. Awesome. So very similar structure as before. And now all we need to do is add an onClick event handler to our button, and that will be it. I'm going to add the isLoading property to our button, and then I'm going to add that onClick and we're going to give it a callback function, and all this is going to do is call sign in with Google. That is it. Let's also actually quickly add some text from Chakra that is going to display that error. If it exists, we will say error and error if it exists. Awesome. So what is going to happen when we click on this button? Let's find out. So if I click sign in with Google, this pop-up is going to pop up and we get some error. What is going on here? I think the reason that this failed is because we have not yet implemented Google Authentication in our app, and this is something I always forget to do. If we come over to sign in method, we need to click on add new provider. Remember, we added email and password, and let's click on Google and let's click enable, and I'm just going to select the email address that I'm currently logged in as. We can ignore the stuff down here. This is for reusing an existing client ID from an already existing Google project, and we will click on save. Perfect. Okay, so now Google is successfully enabled in our project. We should be able to refresh our app and try again. But actually, let's fix this first. This is a React error, and basically what's happening is error is an object, and we cannot render an object in the DOM. We need to render only text. So I'm going to just do error.message. So let's try this again. Let's refresh. All right, what is this? I honestly don't know what's going on here. At render element. Does it have to do with this error? Let's do localhost 3000. Okay, I'm going to just try recompiling the development server. Sometimes, I'm not sure why, there's sometimes some errors with like hot reloading, and just simply recompiling the server can fix it, and that seemed to do it. Also, this error you might see in here, it's saying that there's a duplicate atom key auth modal state. This also has to do with the hot reloading. It says that it is safe to ignore this if it occurred because of a hot module replacement, and that is why it's occurring in this case. Basically, it just thinks that there's two of the same atoms, but there is not, so just kind of ignore this for now. So we can probably re-enable this, and let's go to sign up. Click sign in with Google. This should pop up over here, and if your Gmail account isn't showing up by default there like mine is, just click on the use another account and it might ask you to enter your email and password and authenticate that way. And I'm going to click shadmerhi@gmail.com, and we should be authenticated now. Again, we're going to do some stuff on the UI that's going to handle the successful case, but let's go look at our authentication users. And you can see that I am in there, and it says that I have used the Google provider. So that's pretty cool. And this is it. This is it, guys, for this entire file, OAuth buttons. This is how easy it is to sign in with Google. And if you want to add more providers and more buttons like Apple, Facebook, whatever you want, you know how to do it now with a single line of code. So pretty cool if you ask me. And the nice thing about continuing with Google or any OAuth provider is that it handles both the case of a new user and a returning user. With authenticating with email and password, we have to handle the signing up case as well as the logging in case. So now let's go implement our login method so that users who did sign up with email and password can log in with those credentials. The login logic is going to be very, very similar to the sign up logic. We're going to have this on submit function, and we're going to bring in that use sign in with email and password. We're going to copy this over, bring it into our app. The only thing that's going to be different here is we're going to pass it the email and password in the login form. So let's go to the top and grab those two imports from react-firebase-hooks /auth. We're going to grab sign in with email and password, and we're also going to grab our Firebase auth instance from Firebase/client app. Grab auth, and that will be happy there. Again, same thing with the 4 arguments, except this time we have sign in with email and password. So inside of our onSubmit function, we're going to take in the exact same event as we had in our sign up form, and I'm just going to go copy and paste that over the React form event. I'm going to grab this entire thing right here, bring it into login, inside of this function, I'm going to call event.preventDefault to prevent that refresh of page on submittal. And all we're going to do inside of this function is call sign in with email and password and pass it the login form, the login form dot email and login form dot password. And this function is going to go check if a user with that email exists and if the password is correct. And in our login form, we actually do not need to create another error state variable like we did in signup. In signup, we had to check to make sure that the passwords matched. And in this case, we do not need to do that. And our HTML input element is going to verify that the email is valid. So we do not need our own custom errors here. The only error that could exist in the login form is going to come from Firebase. So we're just going to be okay with using a single error object here. All right, and let's go down and add the error text that could possibly occur. I'm going to open up our app here. So it's going to appear over here very similarly to sign up, just above the button here. So we're going to have some text. So inside of our text, we're going to access that Firebase errors object, and I'm just going to automatically import it here. And inside of here, we're going to need to index it the exact same way we did in sign up, using that complicated TypeScript indexing stuff. So we're going to say error.message as key of type of Firebase errors. That should compile nicely. And actually, I can't remember if I added the login errors to this object. Let's go look. I think I might have, but then I deleted it. Yeah, okay. So I think I added these at some point during sign up, but then I removed them because I wanted to wait until I got to this point of the tutorial. I can't remember if I showed you that I put these in here. These are coming from my existing repository. You can grab them off of GitHub. So Firebase has two types of errors for logging in. The first one is if the user is not found, meaning that a user with that email does not exist. And the second one is if the wrong password has been entered for an existing email. You're technically not supposed to tell the user which one it is because it could be a malicious user. You're supposed to be kind of vague. What I did here was for both of those types of errors, we're going to just show the same error, invalid email or password. So we can cancel that off, and we can test this out by trying to log in with an unexisting email. So for example, I know that the email doug@doug.com is not a user. So if I enter a password and I try to submit, I do get an error, invalid email or password. I do need to style it here quickly. So I'm just going to do the text align is equal to center, and the color is going to be red. Perfect. And the font size is going to be 10 points. 10 point. Yeah, just like that. Perfect. And also, before I forget, I'm just going to add the is loading state to our button because I noticed it didn't work there. We did get the correct error there though, which is perfect. Let's try logging in with shadi@shadi.com. Now we're going to get the other error because I'm going to enter the wrong password. The password for this is shadi. I'm going to enter giant string. We should get the same error. So now we know both errors are working. Let me try if I log in as shadi, but I put the correct password. What happens? Cool. We didn't get an error. We haven't done the stuff to handle what happens when you successfully log in yet, but we now know that error handling is working, and now it looks like we can actually log in to existing accounts. So this is perfect. We can create users with email and password, we can log those users in, and we can also log in with Google. So we've covered all of the sign-in, sign-up methods of Firebase authentication, and now we just need to actually do something useful with that user once they have logged in to tell them that they have logged in. So let's handle that next. All right, you guys, so now that we are able to successfully log users in, let's look at how we can actually obtain the logged in user and do something useful with it. So if we go take a look at those authentication hooks from React-Firebase-Hooks, we can see that the very first one is called useAuthState. And this is actually how we're going to obtain the currently logged in user. And so this hook looks like this. It's implemented like it is here, and it returns three arguments: the user, loading, and error. So it's initialized as null, and once a user is authenticated, we will then actually have access to it through this same object here. So let's go take a look at how that's going to work. When we log in, the first thing we're going to need to do is close the modal, right? Because once you log in, you're kind of done with the modal. So let's go look at how we're going to do that. What we're going to do is inside of the file auth modal, we're going to call that hook useAuthState. So I'm going to write it like this, useAuthState, and I'm going to import it from react-firebase-hooks, and we are going to need to pass it our auth instance again from Firebase client app. So import both of those things, and then we're going to grab those 3 arguments. So the user, loading, and error. Perfect. So again, this is going to be null initially, and this will be true because it's going to go check if there isn't currently authenticated user. And then once this is done loading, we're either going to have a user or not, depending on if they're authenticated. So how are we going to actually close the modal if there is a valid user? Well, what we can do is we can bring in the useEffect-hook, which is a hook that runs when the component mounts as well as when any of the dependencies change. And we can add a dependency of user. And so basically what's going to happen is this code is going to trigger every single time the user object changes. And what do we want to do if the user changes from null to a valid user? If you look up here, we have a function that closes the modal. So if the user object is not null, we can just simply call that function. And now watch what happens. The modal just closed once I refresh because there is a valid user because I logged in already. You need a way, we're going to need a way to sign out. But yeah, this is essentially how we can actually close the modal. And let's actually just add a console log of what the user actually looks like so we can see ourselves. So you can see that it's being logged in the console. It is a valid user. It has email shaddy@shaddy.com and all this other data that's not really relevant. So even though we have a user that is logged in, we are still showing the login and sign up buttons. It'd probably be more useful to show something else because on Reddit, that's when all those icons appear and that's when you actually have the option to log out. So let's go to the parent of those buttons. So what is rendering auth buttons? I believe it is write content. Okay, so inside of here, we're basically going to check if there is a user. And if there is a user, so we're going to add a ternary operator here. We're going to say, if there is a user, we're going to show some component that says there is a user. And if there is not, we're going to want to show the authentication buttons, right? Because you need to, because the user does not exist. So where is this user going to come from? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our navbar, and I'm going to again use that useAuthState hook because we can use it wherever we want. It's a hook that we have access to throughout our entire application, so we can get access to our currently logged in user wherever we want, right? So that's what makes this hook so useful. So we're going to say useAuthState. Again, we're going to need to import those 2 things, useAuthState and our auth object, grab the user, loading, and error. Now we're going to pass our user to multiple components. That's why I'm using it in the navbar because I'm going to pass it to our search input and our write content. You could technically call this hook from both within inside of search input and within inside of write content, but since we're going to pass it to both, I feel like it's better to just call the hook once and then pass it as a prop to these 2 things. So we're going to pass our user to the write content component. So let's add it as a prop user is equal to user, and we're going to see this red underline here, and that is because we need to go into our write content component and actually define an interface for our props, and that is a TypeScript thing. So that's where we're actually going to use this. I don't know if you remember, I said we're eventually going to take in a user. So if I comment that back in, what I need to do now is, because this component is a functional component that takes inputs of type write content props, how I'm going to actually get that value into my component is if I open it up here and say user. I'm basically just destructuring the props. I could also write it like this if I wanted to, and then I would just access props.user. But I prefer to write it in a destructured method. I think it's just a bit cleaner. Okay, so let's save this. Let's go back to here, and we'll notice that that red underline is gone because TypeScript knows this component is expecting a prop called user. So we can save this and check that out. We now know that there is a user because we passed it in and we added that ternary operator. We're gonna make this its own component eventually, but right now let's just add a button that will log the user out, just so we can test this functionality that I'm talking about. So let's just make this a button from Chakra, and it's going to say log out, and on click I'm going to call the sign out method from Firebase. And if you go to your auto imports, you're going to import this from Firebase/auth, and this is how easy it's going to be to sign out. Why is this Oh, I think we also need to pass in our auth object to this thing from client app. Okay, now we have a button that's going to hopefully log us out. So let's click on that and you'll see that that is going to sign us out. It's going to clear that auth state so that now user is going to be null. If I sign back in as shadi@shadi.com with the password shadi, and I log in, the modal closes, and we can see that it is detecting that user. And we're going to change this logout button to an actual like drop-down menu. If you go to reddit.com, you'll see that if you're logged in, there's a drop-down menu, and that's what we're going to add shortly. And we're going to be able to log out by actually adding the logout option. There we go. That is literally how we access the user. We're going to use this hook a lot because we're going to need access to our user in a lot of places, and this hook makes that super easy. And what's nice about this useAuth hook is that it persists the user login on refresh, as well as if the user were to come back to your website in a few days. So if I refresh the page here, for example, we can see that initially for a brief second there, there was a null user, and you can see that in the logs here. So state is initially null, but then it goes and contacts the Firebase servers, and it finds that, oh, there actually is someone authenticated. So we will be logged into our application automatically. All right, so the only part of the authentication flow that we have left to cover is resetting of the password. And what that's going to look like is this. So I just spun up the localhost on my completed project, and just to show you what it's going to look like. And what I've actually decided to do for this section of the tutorial is just make the minor architectural changes to our modal to actually show this component. And then I'm just going to paste in my already written reset password component, and I will explain the critical parts of it. Pretty much the exact same thing as what we've already seen. So I just didn't think it was worth covering the entire thing. And then what you can do is just grab the code for this component off of my GitHub and paste it into your component. All right, so we're just going to quickly add some text beneath this login button that allows the user to go to the reset password form if they did forget their password. So I'm just going to, again, grab that from my other repo and paste it into our login component, and I will explain everything. It's just very, very similar to what we've already seen. Paste that in there. It's a very small section we added to login, and basically this is just some text beneath the login button there. And on click, we're going to do the same thing that we're doing here, except with the reset password view. So I'll paste that in there, and I'm going to make this reset password. And thanks to TypeScript, we get autocomplete. Perfect. Okay, so now let's go to our modal because we need to make some changes to this logic in here and actually render our reset password component. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here and write some JavaScript that's going to allow us to conditionally display these form components. And what that's going to look like is it's going to say modalState.view is if this is equal to login, or the modalState.view is equal to sign up, let's show something. And if none of those are true, then let's show something else. And that something else is going to be this reset password link, right? Because our modal only has 3 views. If we're not logging in or signing up, we are going to be resetting our password. And I'm going to move all of this up here. And then I think I just need to wrap this in a fragment because it needs a parent component of some kind. And we have not yet created reset password, so let's go and do that. Inside of our auth folder, I'm going to create that component, reset password. All right, and this is where I'm going to paste in my already written component from my completed project and explain the important parts. A lot of it is just styling a UI component, so I just didn't think it was worth the time to do that. Hey guys, I am just editing this part of the video, and I noticed that I did not mention to install React Icons as you see online for there. This is the main package we're going to be using for icons, so just install this with the command here, and this should work smoothly. And let's make sure we can actually successfully see this. So I'm going to click on my auto import and add that import, click save. And if I just go to my UI, reset password, we do see that form in there now. So the most important part is right here. We're using that use send password reset email hook from react-firebase-hooks. And we're again passing it that auth object that we created. And then we're just calling that function when we actually click on that reset password button. And we're just passing it the email that the user enters. And this is going to actually send an email to that email. And once that successfully sends, it's going to set success to be true. And the success state variable basically just is something that so that on the UI we can say, oh, go and like the email was successfully sent, go and check your email. And in order to demo this, I do need access to an email that is real and that I actually have access to and am signed in. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go and delete my shadmerhi@gmail.com because I authenticated with Google there. And in order to show this password resetting process, I need to create an account with my shadmerhi email by using email and password authentication, not OAuth. Shadi@shadi is not a real email. All right, so now that there is no account with shadmerhi@gmail.com, I'm going to go and create one with email and password authentication, and make the password Shadi, and I'm going to create that account. Now I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to try to log in, but I already forgot my password, so I better reset it. So I click reset, and if I enter shadmerhi@gmail.com, click reset password, this is its functionality. So it's going to say check your email. I'm going to go to my email, and I'm just going to show you how this works so that if you get this going on your app, you know how it should function. And this is what the email actually looks like. Zoom in a bit. It sends me a link from our Firebase app. If I click on this link, it brings me to a form and it's saying reset your password. So if I reset my password to say Shadi Merhi, my full name, and click enter, it says password changed. And Firebase handles all of the heavy lifting of changing your password. And now if we go back to the app, I should be able to log in with that new password. So I'm going to try logging in with my old password to show you that it's already updated. Shadi did not work, but if I use my new password, Shadi Merhi, it works. So my password has been reset. I'm going to leave it there for password resetting. Again, it's super similar to the other processes in terms of using the hooks and building out the UI component. And I really do want to, and I'm sure you do too, want to move on to more interesting things. All right, everybody, now that we have completed our authentication workflow and we are able to access the currently logged in user, let's make those changes to our navbar to reflect what it's supposed to look like when a user is actually logged in, which is how it looks right here in the completed project here. So if I log out, this is sort of what we currently have. And then when we log in, we will make it appear as this. So we're going to have this drop-down menu, we're going to have these icons, and then this other drop-down menu over here, which is pretty much identical to Reddit. So let's get going on that. All right, so if we recall, inside of the navbar, we're already grabbing that user, and so now we can conditionally display things if that user exists. So let's start off with write content. So write content, just as a reminder, represents sort of all this stuff over here, as well as those authentication buttons, login and sign up. So if I go into write content, we are going to replace this logout button with a component called icons, which is going to be the parent of all of those icons. And then down here, we're going to have that menu, which we're going to bring in from Chakra. It's going to be a drop-down menu, just like we saw over here. Okay, so let's get going on those icons. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to just import a bunch of icons from React Icons. Also, one last thing, the type of this, I just want to change to user, which is the actual proper type, and we can import that from Firebase auth, and that way we will get autocomplete IntelliSense when we're trying to access our user. And you'll notice that we now have some compiler issue with TypeScript because this is saying that it says that type user null undefined is not assignable to type user. So we indicated that we're passing a user in here because we said that here, but it's saying that this could be undefined and it also could be null. And so this type of user null undefined is not assignable to the type we gave it. So we basically just need to go adjust for that. And the way to do that in TypeScript is for undefined, we can just make it optional with a question mark. And for null, we can use the pipe operator to say this is either going to be a user or null. So this whole thing says user or null or undefined, indicated by its optional. And now this thing is happy. Okay, so let's go into our write content directory and create our icons component, icons.tsx. Use our snippet, and what I'm going to do is paste in all of the icon imports because there's about 6 of them, I think. These are all the icons that we're going to put in there. These are all from React Icons. So we are not going to take in any props to this component, so we can remove these. And inside of here, we are going to basically just return a giant flex box, and this flex box is going to have 2 children. The first one is going to be another flex box, and then the second one is just going to be a React fragment. I'm going to explain why we're using a flex here and just a fragment here in just a second. So now that we actually have icons here, which I'm just going to put some icons text so we can see it, let's go to our write content and change the logic here. So we're going to replace this logout button with our new icons component. Import that, and so basically this is just saying that if a user is logged in, show those icons, and if they are not, show the login and sign up button. Perfect. So let's go into icons and actually start building that out. So the reason I am using a flexbox here and just a fragment here is because if you look at our demo, which is based off the real Reddit, you can see that the left container of icons right here disappear or are not visible on mobile screen sizes. They don't appear until medium screen sizes. And so basically we need a flex box here, or we need some sort of component to be able to toggle that display, whereas these ones are always visible, so it doesn't really matter. So that's why we need to have a flex box here. And the way to do that is by just adding a media query on the display, and at base screen sizes, we're going to make it none. And then at medium screen sizes, we're just going to make the display flex, which is going to make it visible. So let's actually start building out these icons. And this is going to have some other properties as well. We're going to make a line to be center, and we're going to make the border right to be 1 pixel solid, and the border color is going to be gray 200. All right, so each icon individually is going to be its own flexbox with the icon component from Chakra inside of it. And the way we're going to use these icons from React Icons is by passing in a prop as to our Chakra icon component, and inside of as we're going to give it one of these icons. So this first one is going to be our BS arrow, I don't know why I'm not getting autocomplete, circle. And each of these icons is going to have a margin right of 1.5, a margin left of 1.5, a padding of 1, a cursor equal to pointer because they are clickable, a border radius of 4, and then when we hover them, we're going to add some hover styling, and we're going to make the background gray 200. And this is what that hover effect looks like. The reason we applied this flex container to our icon is so that we can apply this hover effect as well as the border radius. And display flex ensures that it is centered in the container. Perfect. So once we've done one icon, we can do them all. They're all very, very pretty much the same. So we can just take this and duplicate it. We'll start with the 3 left ones. And this one is going to be our IO filter circle icon, which is supposed to represent like creating a poll on Reddit. And then this third one is going to be our video cam, IO video cam outline. And now one downside to React icons is they don't have standardized sizes. They're not all the same size. So sometimes you have to play around with the font sizes to make them appear the same. So for this first one, we're going to give it a font size of 20. And these other two, we're going to give a font size of 22. And the way to add multiple cursors is to basically just do option click. And you can add as many as you want and type in multiple places, which is super cool. And now we can work on the right side icons. So similar thing. These are always going to be visible, which is why, again, they're just in a fragment. And I'm going to grab one of these, paste it in there. And this first one is going to be our chat icon, our chat dots, and we are going to duplicate this again 3 times, or twice, I guess. And then the second one is going to be our notifications, and the third one is going to be add icon, gr add, for like creating a post. Perfect. And we're going to make the font size of these last 3 to be 20, just because they do appear a bit larger. And the way to select duplicate instances of something, in this case, a repeated 20, is to do, you highlight the first one, and then you press Command D, and that'll highlight all of the next occurrences of that thing. I have a video on my top 5 VS Code shortcuts. Do check that out. I think everything I've mentioned so far is in that video. So yeah, maybe go stop and watch that right now, and that'll help you with this project. And just to show you the responsiveness, in mobile screen sizes, those left icons are not visible. Also, we're going to make this plus icon not visible at small screen sizes as well. So we're going to, again, add the media query on our display, and we're going to say base, none, and then at medium screen sizes, we will make it flex, so that only the chat and the notification one are visible in mobile, which is the same as Reddit. Awesome, so we are completely done with icons now. We can close this, we are not going to look at them again, and we can start working on that little directory menu in the top right corner here. All right, so let's create our new menu component. So inside of write content, I'm going to create a component called userMenu.tsx, and I'm going to use our snippet. And what I'm going to do is come over to the Chakra docs. If you just search for Chakra menu and you come to this page here, we're basically just going to grab the code for this component here and modify it to look how we need it to look. So I'm going to grab this, And that's what we're going to return inside of our component here. And then we can just automatically import everything, command period, add all missing imports. Perfect. So basically the menu button represents the actual thing that you see that is going to trigger the menu opening. And then there is a menu item for each thing that you see inside of the menu. Okay, so let's make some modifications to make it look like this. Our menu button is going to have that little Reddit icon with the chevron down thing. And then when we're logged out, it's going to appear as just that regular sort of avatar icon. And that's the same behavior as Reddit. They have this Reddit icon with the chevron. And then if you log out, they have just this avatar looking thing. And I tried to find icons that were most similar to the real Reddit, but of course, sometimes you can't find the exact one, so you have to sort of just use something that's similar. Okay, so let's actually implement this. Let's go comment this in and import that. And actually we named it user menu. And let's go to our app, and we can see that we have this drop-down menu now. So let's come back and make those modifications. So since our menu button does change depending if a user is logged in, let's go actually pass our user to our user menu so that we can make those adjustments when we do need to make them. So we're going to say user is equal to user, and then we're just going to forward that as a prop to our component, and we can do the exact same thing as we did before with making it null, undefined, or user. Okay, so now we have access to the user and we can do some conditional rendering. So I'm going to grab the user from our props, and I'm going to remove this actions text and replace it with a ternary operator that's going to say if there is a user, meaning we are logged in, show something, and if there is not a user, show something else. And that something else for right now is just going to be a div that says no user, and if we are logged in, let's show user. Perfect. So we are currently logged in, so we can see that it says user. So we can remove this as button thing. We can also remove this right icon. Let's work on now what this div is going to be if we do have a user. So if a user exists, we're going to add a fragment here, and we're going to have an icon. And I'm just going to paste in all of the icons that we're going to use here, which are just going to be 3 different icons. And then this icon is going to be the FA Reddit square. And then let's make some minor CSS adjustments to it. We'll say font size is going to be 24. Give it a margin right of 1, and then we're going to make the color gray 300. And we're actually going to wrap this fragment in a flexbox. There's going to be 2 flexboxes actually, but for now we'll just use 1. And then I just need to import that from Chakra UI. Awesome, and that just centers the icon. Without the flexbox, you'll notice that the icon kind of is not centered there. So that is why we have a flexbox there. And then we can also add that. This is where we can move that chevron down icon. Right there. And we're also going to add another flexbox. So there's going to be 2, which might seem a bit unclear right now, but it will make sense in a bit as we build this out. And then we're just going to make both of the align on these to be center. Just like that. And that centered that chevron there. Cool. So now this opens up the menu. We just need to style it a bit. Now let's come up to our menu button and add just a few styles. So we're going to make the cursor pointer. Our padding is going to be 0 pixels, 6 pixels, and then our border radius is going to be 4. 4 is going to be sort of our standard border radius for everything in our app, and we're going to give it hover state styling of an outline of 1 pixel solid, and our outline color is going to be gray 200. Awesome, and that looks like this. Nice, which is very, very much the same as Reddit. Awesome. So let's come back here and let's just quickly replace this because it's going to be super easy. We're going to have an icon, and that icon is going to be VSC account. That's one of the icons we imported from React Icons. And it's going to have a font size of 24, color of gray 400, and a margin right of 1. Now let's actually build out the proper menu items here. So right now we have just a bunch of random ones that would come with the default component. So let's just get rid of all of these. We'll keep one of them. And then inside of our first one, this is what we're going to have. So our menu items are going to look like this. They're going to have a flexbox. And then inside of the flexbox, we're going to have an icon. And this first one is going to be an icon called CG profile. And I guess I did not import that. And that is coming from React Icons CG. So let's go quickly do that. CG profile here. Awesome. And then we're going to have the text profile. Perfect. So let's go back to our app and see what that looks like. Okay, so that is there, but it looks kind of terrible, so let's fix that up. Okay, so the align on this is going to be center, and then our icon is going to have a font size of 20 and a margin right of 2. Perfect, that's looking a bit better. And then let's come up to our menu item, make our font size equal to 10 point, our font weight equal to 700, and our hover state is going to have a background of blue, 500, and the text color is going to be white. So this is what that looks like. So when we hover over it, it has that blue, and it makes the icon and the text white. Perfect. Now our second one is going to be pretty much the exact same thing. We can copy this, paste it down here, except this is going to be where we can actually log out. We'll say log out, and we just need to import one more icon from React Icons. Sorry, I forgot to import these last two. It's going to be React Icons /md, and it's going to be md outline login. Perfect. Now let's go change it there. md outline login, and that looks like this. And you'll notice on Reddit that they have this divider. I don't know if you can see it there. It's a very subtle gray line between all of these and the logout one. So let's quickly add that. Chakra makes that super easy with their component menu divider. Make sure that's imported. And now we have that nice divider there. Okay, and all we need to do now is add our Firebase logout function to our logout menu item the exact same way we were doing it before with that logout button. So we can just add an onClick to that menu item. And this onClick is going to call our signout method from Firebase Auth, make sure it imports. And then we're going to pass this our auth object from client app. So now if I actually click on this thing, I should be able to log out, and we'll see the display has changed there. And then if I log back in as Shadi Merhi, we can see that the Navbar updates and we are now signed in. And I think we have to make some minor changes to our flexbox up here. I think I might have done something wrong. So we just need to move these flex containers outside of our ternary operator. So this might be kind of weird to change. I'm going to move these outside like this, move these two up top, and we can move this icon out here between those two flexbox containers. My apologies for that. That is kind of confusing to restructure, but basically we just had to move the two flexboxes outside so that this was centered and we get that chevron there, and then we can log in, and then it appears the same way when we have the chevron icon in both the logged in and logged out state. So something else we have to do in here is the contents of the menu changes when we are logged out. When we're logged out, we should just only see the options to sign in. If you go to our demo, if I log out, we just have this thing, login, sign up. And on Reddit, they have a menu with a bunch of more options, but these are features we're not going to build. So we're just going to have the login sign up thing, which is just going to open the modal. So that's going to be very, very easy to add. So let's go back to our app. So basically our menu list content is just going to change depending on if there is a user. So right inside of our menu list, we can add another ternary operator that's going to check for the existence of a user. And then our first thing, we can have just a fragment. Our second thing can be a fragment as well. Our first fragment, if there is a user, is just going to be everything we've already written, all of these menu items up here, just like that. And if we're logged out, we just need to show a menu item that prompts the user to log in. We want this to say login/sign up, just like that. And so then we just need to make this actually open that login sign up modal. The way to do that is we can import our Recoil state setter function. Const set auth modal state is equal to use set Recoil state, pass our auth modal state. Atom, come down here and do what we've already done a few times now. On this menu item, we do not want to sign out. We want to add an onClick that is going to call that set auth modal state. And the state we want to set it to is going to be open, true, and our view is going to be login by default. So now if they actually click on this login sign up thing, it opens the modal, which is exactly what happens on reddit.com. And we can sign in directly from here. And that seems to be working completely fine. And also you'll notice on larger screen sizes that this text appears with our username and the karma. So let's quickly add that. All right, so for that karma text, I'm just going to paste it in here from my other repo because it's only about 10 lines, and then I can just explain what's going on. So I'll paste it right here beneath our Reddit icon. And what that looks like is like this. You can see that my name is there as well as the user Karma and that little orange icon thing. So basically this is just a flexbox with some additional styling applied to it. The most important part is here. And the reason we have both of these is because if a user authenticates with Google, they will have a property on their user object called displayName, which is coming from their Google account. And then if they authenticate with email and password, they will only have an email. They will not have a displayName. So basically this just checks for the existence of the displayName. And if it does not exist, it will show this. So what's happening here is that when we split a string at a certain character, it's going to give us an array. And by accessing the first index of that array, we're taking all of the text to the left of the @ sign in the email, which in my case is Shad Merhi. And so one of these two things are acting as the user's username. And you'll also notice down here that I have hard-coded the karma of the user. And I'm going to show you in a bit how to add custom properties to this user object. And that is what's going to lead us into our discussion of cloud functions. Because right now with Firebase, we cannot add additional properties. And this is something that is written in the Firebase docs. They do not allow you to modify this particular object. If you want to add custom properties, things like karma or username or anything that is not on this base user object, we do need to store it in another database table and then we can make those modifications. But we will see more of this when we get into cloud functions and it'll make a lot more sense then. All right, so we are now completely done with this user drop-down menu component. It is fully functional for both logged in and logged out users, and we can now work on this community drop-down menu and start to get into more of the community-based logic of the app. All right, you guys, we are so close to being done this nav bar. All we have to do is add this community drop-down menu and make it a little bit responsive. And it's going to be extremely similar to our user menu that we've already created. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm actually just going to copy everything from inside of this file, user menu, and then I'm going to come to my directory. And inside of my nav bar, I'm going to create a new directory called directory because we're going to have a few child components inside of here. And inside of here, I'm going to make a new file called directory, which is going to be sort of the root of the directory. I feel like I've said directory about 8 times now. Directory.tsx. Use our snippet. Actually, we don't even need the snippet. I'm just going to paste in everything that we have, and then I will save that. And the parent of this directory was navbar. We defined it here before, but we just never used it. And now I'm actually going to import it from that directory. Import directory from directory. I called it directory because it's kind of a community directory. That's sort of the naming behind it. You can see that in our app, we have this icon thing, and then there is a drop-down menu. But it does not look like we need it to look like ours. It needs to look like this with the icon as well as the different content. Okay, so let's come back to here and let's get working on that. So inside of directory, we can get rid of all of the user-based stuff because we're not even going to show this component at all unless the user is logged in. We're going to get rid of all of this entire ternary operator. Let's get rid of that so that we have an empty menu list. Perfect. And then also can get rid of this user ternary operator as well. So now we just have the foundations laid out for our component, just so we don't have to write it completely from scratch. And we're not going to need this. And we are actually not going to take in any props here. There is no conditional rendering at all. No props. And then we can clean up all the imports because there is a ton of not used stuff in here. So we can just use that organize imports command from VS Code. Reminder, if you forgot how to do that, Command Shift P and then search for organize imports, and you can do that. Perfect. So now we have this very simple dropdown that is empty. So let's work on our menu button. And we basically just have these 2 flex boxes to center everything that we're going to put inside of here and make it all look nice and aligned. So I'm just going to quickly import this home icon into here, and that is going to be from React Icons. It's going to be from React Icons /TI. And this is going to be the TI home. And these subdirectories, in case you're wondering, I can't remember if I explained this, if you go to reacticons.com and if you just go into the documentation here, basically if you search for anything like home, they have a huge library of icons. And whenever you click on one, like say you like this one, the first 2 letters are RI, and that would mean that it would come from the subdirectory RI. In case you were wondering, I can't remember if I explained that. I apologize if I did not. All right, so inside of this inner flex box, we want to add that icon. So we're going to say icon as TI home. And then underneath that, we're going to add some text. Ooh, it's actually going to import from Chakra. And we are going to put home here for now. And when we actually start getting into the creation of communities, we will toggle this to show the current community that we're on. But in order to do that, we need to know which community page we're on, and we have not yet created community pages yet. So for now, we're just going to hard code home. And this icon, we're going to add a font size of 24 and a margin right. At mobile screen sizes, it's going to be 1. And at medium screen sizes, it's going to be 2. And this is kind of just finicky stuff that really, really makes the design replicate Reddit and make everything fit in there nicely. And this text also needs a media query on it because you'll notice that on certain screen sizes, it is not displayed because there is just no room for it. So what we need to do to solve that is to create another flexbox and then actually put the text inside of there and add a media query on it, similar to what we've done already. And we're going to make at base screen sizes, it's going to be none, and at large screen sizes, it's going to be flex. And let's make the font weight of this 600. And you'll notice here that if I'm hovering over this button, there is not any space between it and the search bar. So what we need to do is just add some additional margin to that menu button. So what that's going to look like is the left one, or the right one, is always just going to be 2. Then on the left, we're going to also change this with screen size, and we're going to make it at base screen sizes, it's going to be 0, and at medium screen sizes, it's going to be 2. And these media queries just help it look really good on all screen sizes to make sure that not everything is squished. I'm just going to make the font size of this to be equal to 10 point. And that shrinks it down there nicely, and that looks good. And then we also just need to adjust the width of this container because you'll notice that in this demo, it gets larger. So in order to achieve that, we need to come into this outer flex box here and say justify is going to be equal to space between. That's going to make sure there is the maximum amount of space between every child of this component. And the 2 children in our case are this flex box as well as this chevron down icon. So it's going to maximize the space between these 2 things here. And then to add that responsive width, I'm just going to add a media query on the width. At base screen sizes, it's going to be auto, so it's just going to take up as much space as it needs. And then on the large screen sizes, we're going to cap this at 200 pixels, and this is what that looks like. So you can see it grows, and it looks great on all screen sizes. If you go on reddit.com and you play around with the responsiveness, it's the same thing. All right, and the most exciting part of this entire drop-down menu is what's inside of the menu list. And the menu list is going to be the communities component. And this is where we're going to start to get into the very, very exciting Reddit functionality where we can actually create communities and join communities. And that logic is going to happen inside of here. And that is coming up very, very shortly. So for now, I'll leave a blank component and I'll just put the text communities in there so that we can get excited about communities. One last thing to make the behavior of this navbar pretty much exactly the same as Reddit is to just modify the width of the search bar if a user is logged in. You'll notice if I go to the demo, the width of the search bar just sort of takes up all of the space that it can, that is available for it. And if I log out, it is capped at a certain size. You'll see that it stops growing. And it's very simple to do it. It's literally, I think, a few lines. So all we need to do is come over to our navbar and just pass the user to our search input, exactly like we're doing below. Come to our search input. And I mentioned that we're going to take in a user here long ago. So let's actually take that in now. It is going to be of type user. Grab it from our props through destructuring. All we're going to do in here is add a single line to this flexbox, the max width property. And we are going to say if there is a user, the max width is auto. And if there is not a user, cap the width at 600 pixels. So we're getting an error here. Its user is not defined. And that's because we just need to add that same type to our prop type. And that should solve that. Never mind, it does not at all. Oh, user. I'm supposed to pass in the user object. User was not defined. And we only want to show this directory if the user is logged in. Okay, so if I log out, we can see that the directory is not even displayed. You'll notice that if we start playing around with the responsiveness when we're not logged in, it gets really, really janky. So we just need to add a few properties to these flex containers here. On this outer one, I'm just going to add justify content, or justify for short. On medium screen sizes, we want this to be space between. And that is going to make an even amount of space between all of its child components. And then on this one here, on this inner content, we want the width to be responsive as well. We're going to give it 40 pixels at mobile screen sizes, and then on medium screen size is and up, we're going to give it auto width, and then our margin right is going to have a base margin of 0, and at medium screen sizes it's going to be 2. And now we should see complete responsiveness with our navbar, and we can see that that search bar container is capped at that width, and that looks really good. All right, so we are completely done with the navbar. The only thing that's going to change is that this icon is going to be dynamic depending on what community that we're in. It's going to display the actual community icon. And we're going to do that logic using a custom React hook that we're going to build once we are able to create communities. So let's now create the modal to actually create communities that we can access through this drop-down menu. So if I go to the completed project and I open this up here, when we click this, we want this to pop up and we'll actually be able to create a community. So that is our next goal. Let's get going on that. All right, you guys, let's build this modal. I'm honestly just super pumped about how this looks. It just looks so clean. I love it. All right, so let's go back to our app and start building this thing. So we saw that inside of directory, we already defined where this modal is going to be. So let's actually bring that back in and go and create that component. Save that and let this error out. And this component is going to go inside of this directory. Maybe the word directory was a confusing name. I honestly did not even think of that when I was building it, how confusing that would be. So let's drop our snippet in here and save that, and let's come back here and import it. Just going to refresh here. Okay, so we have our component have a good coding, which doesn't really make sense. Not sure who made this snippet, but doesn't make sense. Whatever, it's still a useful tool. So inside of here, there's going to be a bunch of stuff, but for now, this is the structure that we're going to create. We're going to have a fragment, and this fragment is going to have a component called create community modal. So since this thing is a modal, we're going to put it along with any of its children inside of the modal directory, and we're going to give it its own folder called create community. Inside of this create community, we're going to create another file, and this is going to be the root of the create community modal. So we're going to call it create community modal.tsx. Inside of here, we're going to use our snippet, and I'm just going to come down here and I will put in community modal. Perfect. All right, and now let's come back to here and just import that, and we should see it in there. Now, this is actually going to be a menu item that is going to open an actual modal. And we're going to need a menu item from Chakra. And the reason we're using a menu item is because the parent of communities is a menu itself. And so that's why we're using a menu item. All right, so inside of this menu item, we're going to have a flex box. And this is where we're actually going to put that text, create community. But we haven't imported flex yet, so let's do that, save that. And also inside of this flex box, we're going to have our icon. And our icon is going to be the same icon that we're using in the navbar here. It's going to be the add icon. And that icon is coming from React Icons /GR. And this is the GR add icon, just like that. And then inside of here, we're going to say icon as GR add. Awesome. And what does that look like? Perfect. So now we're going to center this. So I'm going to say align center. That will center that there. And we're just going to adjust the size of this text and this icon. So our icon font size is going to be 20. And we're going to give it a margin right of 2. Just so there's space between there. Okay, and on our menu item, we're going to give it some styles as well. We're going to give this a width of 100%, a font size of 10 point, and then on hover, we're going to give it a background of gray 100. And we can also add the on click, because this is the thing we're going to click on when we're actually going to want to open the modal. So because we need access to the open state of the modal in this component, as well as inside of the modal, because the modal needs to know if it's open, we're going to define that state in this component. So we're going to say open, set open, and it's going to be useState, and we're going to say false. Starting off, we don't want it to be open initially, and then this onClick is just going to call that set open and set it equal to true. And then we can just pass open as a prop to the create community modal. So let's go to create community modal, and this is going to take a prop in that is a Boolean and then we can destructure that here. Awesome. So now I'm going to go to the Chakra documentation and grab that modal once again, similar to what we did before with the authentication modal. And I'm going to grab this one here because it has a footer, which we're going to need. If you look at the demo one, we have a footer there. So I'm going to grab the one with the footer. I'm going to grab the entire return statement. And that is what, just like that. And then I'm going to auto import all of this stuff, add all missing imports. And we're not going to need this button because the thing that opens our modal was this menu item out here. So we can get rid of that button completely. And so we passed open as a prop to this community just a second ago. So that is what I'm going to say here. I'm going to say is open is going to be that open Boolean there. And I'm going to actually add another prop that we're going to take in called handle close. And this handle close function, we're going to pass it as a prop over here, handle close. And all of this function is going to do is it's just going to be a callback that calls set open and sets it equal to false. And the type definition of this function is just going to look like this. It's just a callback function that does not return anything. And when a function does not return anything, we can just say void. And then we're just saying that the type of this function is an arrow function that takes in no arguments and returns void. That's all this means. And in the future, we will see some more interesting type definitions for functions. All right, and then we can accept that prop here by destructuring it, and then on close, we can call handle close. Let's get rid of this lorem thing because all that is just text. Here is the modal body I'm going to write. And then here we can also just call handle close. Perfect. So let's go see what that looks like. We have an error. What is going on here? I don't see, oh, something down here. I think we're just missing that bracket there. There we go. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So I open up this thing, I click create community, and bam, we have our modal. I can close it. Nice. And so now all we have to do is just build the inside of this modal, and these buttons are going to look slightly different. But for now, I'm just going to make this say create community because it's kind of cool because that's actually the button we're going to click when we create the community. So it's exciting. It's going to look like this. All right, so now we're going to start building out this modal. This component is going to contain a lot of interesting things. It's going to have all of the logic necessary to create a community. So it's going to be interacting with our Firestore database, and it's going to be our first glimpse at creating Firestore documents. We're also going to get to see database transactions and batch writes for the first time, so it's going to be very interesting, and do not worry if you do not know what those are. I will explain them when we get to them. But before we do anything that has to do with Firestore, we actually need a component to interact with. So let's build out the UI for this modal. I'm just going to close the directory on the left so that we have a bit more room because this component is a bit long. And let's start off with this header. So the header is going to say create a community, just like that. And we're going to add some styling to here. So we're going to make the display flex. The flex direction is going to be column. We're going to make the font size just a bit smaller. We're going to make this 15, and we're going to give it some padding of 3, just like that. So underneath the header, we're going to have a box component, and a box is just a div, and we don't need flexbox here, so that's why we're just using a generic box. And we're going to put everything except the footer inside of this box. So we're basically just giving an extra container to our modal body so that we can apply some additional styles to it. And we're going to give a padding left of 3 and a padding right of 3. And we had to wrap the body inside of this extra box just so that we can apply this additional padding here. I was playing around with trying to do it on the body, and it was just kind of weird. And so to get it to look exactly like Reddit, I just added this additional box here, and that seemed to work great. And our modal body, we're going to add some properties as well. We're going to make the display flex, and we're going to make the flex direction column, and we're going to give it some padding, and that padding is going to be 10 pixels, so top, bottom, 10 pixels, and right, left, 0 pixels. And I'll add a border here just so you can have an idea of what it is that we're looking at there. Okay, and inside of here, we're going to have some text from Chakra. Text is going to be name, and this text is going to have a font weight of 600 and a font size of 15. And underneath this text, we're going to have another text, and this text is going to say community names, including capitalization, cannot be changed. And this is just something it says on Reddit. It must be some rule they have. And our font size of this is going to be 11, and our color is going to be gray 500. Awesome. All right, and underneath this, we're going to have another text. And this text that we're about to add is this part here. It's this little bit of text, this R / inside of the input, and styling this was honestly quite tricky. I had to inspect the real Reddit styles for a while to figure out how they actually did this, because it's kind of weird. There's just a bit more to it than meets the eye, but I ended up figuring it out. So let's proceed. All right, so this text is going to be the R /. Let's go back to our app. So we have the R /, and underneath this is where we're going to have the actual input for the community name. And this input is going to be the actual input that the user puts the community name in that they're creating. So let's go create some state so that they can do that. I'm going to call it community name and set community name. And it's going to be initialized as an empty string. Now on our input, we're going to have that be the value. So our value is going to be that community name variable. And we're going to give this a size of small. And I'm actually going to remove that border red because it also applies to the input and it looks really bad. So let's remove that. And here we're going to give this a padding left of 22 pixels. And then this has to tie into that weird R / thing, which I'll explain in a second. We're going to add an onChange function here, which for right now, we're going to make an empty callback function. And now let's actually position that R to be properly positioned inside of the input as it appears here. So this is the reason we added this padding left to that input there. We need to use relative and absolute positioning. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the position of this input relative, and then we're going to make the position of this text also relative, and this allows us to basically customize the position of this particular component. And what I mean by that is we can specify like how many pixels it is from the top of its parent container. In our case, it's 28 pixels, and from the left, it is 10 pixels, and the width of this is going to be 20 pixels. So kind of weird. This is literally exactly what Reddit is doing. This is the same method they use, so blame them if you think that this is weird. And then also the color of this is going to be gray 400. It's a bit lighter. Don't need these brackets. Awesome, so that's looking pretty good. All right, and then underneath this input, there is a text that indicates how many characters we have remaining. So this is going to say some number characters remaining, and that number, we're going to need another state variable. I think what is the default? I forget. The default is 21. So we're going to say 21 characters remaining, but we need to make this actually a dynamic value. So let's go up to the top and let's create that characters remaining state. So chars remaining, set chars remaining is equal to useState, and we're going to initialize it as 21. And while we're here, actually, let's create that handle change function that our input is going to use, because it's inside of this function that we're going to recalculate how many chars we have left in the name. So then we can come back down to here and place that on our input. So it's going to say not on change, handle change. Perfect. And inside of this handle change function, it's going to implicitly take in an event like we saw with our other inputs in our login and sign up forms. It's going to be a react.change event, and the type of element that is outputting this event is an HTML input element. Okay, so we need to do a few things inside of this function. So the first thing we need to do is actually update the community name state by using the event.target.value. That's the current value inside of the input that the user has typed. And then the way we're going to recalculate how many characters we have remaining is like this. We're going to say set chars remaining, and we're going to take the total amount that they have available, which is 21, and subtract the length of the string that they have currently entered, and that's going to be the characters remaining. Also, we do not want to set community name if they are over that limit. So we can do that by adding a check here that says if event.target.value.length is greater than 21, then just return. We do not want to do any of this. We just want to exit the function. So this is a guard against going over that limit. So what does this look like now when we type in here, hello there? That's not updating. It's because I forgot to change this to chars remaining. Okay, so now if I type in there, hello there, how are you? We can see that it doesn't let us go past that limit. So we're only allowed 21 characters. Cool. And let's modify this to be read when they have hit their character limit. And so the color of this is going to change depending on the value of characters remaining. So we can check, does chars remaining equal 0? If it does, let's make the color of this red. And otherwise, let's make this gray 500. So we can see it's gray, and if I hit that limit, it turns red, which is perfect. Very, very intuitive. And we're also just going to make this a tad bit smaller, so we'll make this font size equal to 9. Just like that. Okay, that is super clean. I love this UI so much. Okay, now underneath this text, we're going to add another box component. And in this box, this is where we're going to have that community type selection list, just like this. So the first thing we're going to put in here is going to be text, and that's going to say community type. And we're going to make the font weight a little heavy, and the font size is going to be 15. Nice. And let's add some margin top and bottom to this box container so that there is some space between it and the character input. So let's do some margin top of 4 and the margin bottom also 4. So now everything's laid out pretty good. All right, and now this is where we're actually going to put that checkbox component. And the checkbox is going to be a component, again, from Chakra that's going to be wrapped in this stack component. And what stack is it's basically just a flex box that is going to automatically handle the spacing between all of its children for us. So we can pass it a prop called spacing. I think the default is 2, and it basically just spaces everything kind of evenly between it like that, just like that. They come in handy when you have, stacks of things that are spaced evenly. And in this case, that's what we have with our checkbox. All right, so inside of our stack, we're going to have 3 checkbox components from Chakra. So we can just duplicate this. And the first one is going to be a public community type. The second one is going to be restricted. And the third one is going to be private. Those are the 3 community types you can have on Reddit. Okay, except we're only allowed to have one of these, right? You can only make one. But there's a problem. We can currently select multiple. So we need to implement some logic that will only allow us to select one of these. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to declare another state variable that is going to be called community type. And we're going to call set community type. And it's going to be useState, and the default is going to be public. And these checkbox elements also emit an event just like any other input does. And we can use that event to actually know which community type we have selected. So if you recall from our login and signup forms, we had built that onChange function that basically took in an event and it used the name of the event target to update state. And we're going to do pretty much the exact same thing here with those checkboxes. So I'm going to create a function called onCommunityTypeChange. And this is going to take in an event, and that event is going to be a react.change event, and still the type of it is an input element, because a checkbox is just an input element. That's all it is. And inside of here, we can set community type to be the event.target.name. But we did not add yet names to our checkboxes. So the name of this, we're going to make public, because we need these for the event to actually know which thing was clicked on. The name of this is going to be just restricted. And the name of this is going to be, you guessed it, private. And checkbox input elements have this property called isChecked. And isChecked is a Boolean that represents whether or not this thing is checked. But since this is a Boolean, I can add some logic to actually toggle that checked state. So in our case, we only want this public checkbox to appear as checked if community type is equal to public. And then the ones down here, we only want this one to be checked if the community type is restricted, and we only want this one to be checked if the community type is private. So now only this one's checked, but we have not added the onChange function to our inputs yet, so let's do that now. So we're going to say onChange. We're just going to call that on checkbox or on community type change. And I'm going to place this on both of these other checkboxes. So now when I actually select one of them, that state is toggling and we're only allowed to select one of them. Perfect, that's exactly what we need. All right, so we need to style this input text slightly different. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a text element, put the public text in there, and we are going to give this a font size of 10 point and a margin right of 1. And the reason we have a margin right is because we're going to put another thing of text that explains basically what a public community is. So a public community has the description, anyone can view, post, and comment to this community. And in order to make these two things appear properly, we need to wrap them in a flex box like this, import flex from Chakra, and make align equal to center. Now they are aligned properly, but we need to change the size of this. So let's come to this description text here, and we're going to make the font size 8, and the color is going to be gray 500, padding top of 1. Awesome, and that looks really, really good. So we can do the exact same thing with those other two. So I'm just going to copy this flex box here, paste it here, change it to restricted, and the description for a restricted community is anyone can view this community, but only approved users can post. Same thing down here, I'm going to paste that for private, change this to private, and the description for private communities is only approved users can view and submit to this community. Now, the only thing missing from each of these checkboxes is an icon, just like this here. So we're going to quickly import those 3 icons. And those icons are going to, again, come from React Icons. And these are those 3 here. So we have one coming from the HI sublibrary, and 2 of them are coming from the BS library. Okay, so we're going to need our icon component from Chakra UI. And our public one is going to be BS fill person fill. I hate when you don't get autocomplete. And the color is going to be gray 500, and we're going to give it a margin right of 2. Just there's some space there. Let's copy this icon component and come down to restricted. And our icon for restricted is going to be BS fill I fill I. And then private is going to be HI locked close. Nice. All right, so this is looking a little bit weird. We are seeing some overflow and the text is a bit too long. And luckily for us, Chakra has multiple modal sizes, and all we need to do is just pass a prop with a string with the size we would like, and we can just specify large, and that widens it a bit. All right, awesome. And the last thing we have to do for this modal UI is just finish up the footer. So let's come down here. So we're going to give our footer a background of gray 100 and a border radius 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels. And if you have not seen this for input notation before for border radius, basically just each one of these corresponds to a specific corner. So the first one is this, then this one, then this one, and then this one. So it goes in a clockwise rotation. Okay, so this first button is going to say cancel instead of close. We can get rid of this color scheme thing here. We're going to make the variant of this outline, and we're going to give it a height of 30 pixels, just like that. And then our create community button is also going to have a height of 30 pixels. And we can just get rid of this variant because by default it's going to have that solid fill variant. And we're going to add an onClick here, which is going to be the onClick responsible for actually calling the create community function when we have that created. But for now, we will leave this empty. And we are now done building out the UI for this modal. It's looking super, super good. This was a longer component that did take a while to build. I hope all of that makes sense. And we can now get into more of the back-end logic of actually creating communities. And we're going to start creating community documents in our database. And in doing that, we're going to get to see database transactions and batch writes. And it's all going to be super exciting. We're going to learn a ton about Firebase. All right, and this seemed like a good place to leave it for part 2. We have covered a ton in this video. We completed the entire Firebase authentication workflow, and we have built a ton of components and have basically become masters at building out responsive UIs with Chakra. With user authentication being completely done and our UI foundations being built, our development process is going to skyrocket. And in the next part, we are going to be working heavily with user-generated data like community creation, as well as creating posts in those communities. And we're basically going to become Cloud Firestore Database geniuses. So thank you so much for watching this. Please do let me know in the comments if you have any feedback on how I can make this tutorial series better. Join the Discord linked in the description and subscribe for future parts and for future content. Thank you so much once again, and I will see you in the next one.